two main points of analysis. The first one talks about the Soviet Union and how its fall was prejudicial to the entire world. Why is this important? Because in the article, The New World Disorder talks about different problems that were created after the fall of the Soviet Union. But we need to remember something. After the Second World War and even before, the Soviet Union was a centralized government. What does this mean? That even though, for example, in East Germany, they have their own government, it was supervised by Moscow. Basically, after Cominform and Comecon, there were some plans to reconstruct and to give more support to the Soviet countries. Normally, Moscow wanted to have more jurisdiction. Why? To avoid riots, to avoid subleration, and to avoid the fall of their government, because these were strategic for positions for them. What does this mean? To collaborate with certain groups, for example, like terrorist cells or mafias. Why did they do this? Because they knew that they couldn't eliminate these groups, but they said, if we can control them within our territory, we can show strength, and if we collaborate with them, we may have a more prosperous country with less problems. The problem is that after the fall of the Soviet Union, Russia wasn't planning to reconstruct their Soviet Union. They tried. They were focused more on economic growth, on seeing for their own people in their own territory. After this, these other countries that, for example, suscitated after this, didn't have the support of the Soviet Union, or in this case of Russia. This is problematic because they were unstable, and even though a lot of the European countries joined to the Eurozone and to the European Union, this wasn't fast enough. When the article was written in 1994, there were a lot of economic problems. For example, it talks about the problem with the gangs, the problems with drugs, and all these kind of problems that were really important, and that created insecurity within the region. Why? Because they depended constantly on the supervision of the Soviet Union, and when they were left apart in crisis, they didn't knew how to respond to this. And now we're passing to the second point of analysis that the author, interestingly, says about expanding the authority of NATO. Why was NATO created? Let's remind something of this. NATO was created as a counterweight for Russia, for the Soviet Union, for them not to expand after the Truman Doctrine, because they wanted to contain literally communism, because they believed, and justified, that the Soviet Union wanted to expand not only in territory but in their ideology. NATO was created specifically for this, for any conflict that could be created against the Soviet Union. The problem is that after the fall of the Soviet Union, this purpose was not existent. And what the author says is that it should be restructured to protect, for example, European countries, or to see, for example, in military interventions, for example, like Rwanda, like the one in Bosnia. But the problem is that this literally violates sovereignty, and he says literally that the United Nations Security Council is useless. This is very interesting because NATO wasn't created like a peacekeeping, or like a way to see for the safety of all. It was created specifically to see for the interest of some countries, specifically the United States. Why this is problematic? Because the United States mostly controls NATO in counterweight from the Security Council, that yes, they may control some of this. The NATO is more control for the United States, has less counterweights, has less institutions to measure the power of superpowers. This is problematic because what the author says basically is that yes, we should replace the UN Security Council. It should be only focused on peacekeeping, and to resolve any kind of conflicts, we should restructure and use NATO in our favor. This is problematic for the same reason that without counterweights, we have seen what powerful countries can do. They literally can massacre people, or they can use this institution in their own interest.